Lead them on, Aragorn. The bridge is near, Gandalf advises in Peter Jackson's film adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring. You must guide them forward, Gandalf urged, gripping Aragorn's shoulder. The bridge lies ahead, our only path to safety. The equivalent passage in Ian Chesterfield's novelization, itself adapted from Jackson's film. These two excerpts illustrate the different priorities and expressive tools available to cinema and prose. The film version is compact, functioning on the principle that in cinema, time and pacing are paramount. In the midst of an urgent sequence, Gandalf's instruction must register instantly with the audience. The prose version, by contrast, can afford elaboration. It transforms a utilitarian order into a moment of heightened drama. The clause, quote, "our only path to safety," end quote, explicitly states the stakes, something the film can imply visually, but a novel must articulate in text to ensure the reader grasps the danger without needing an accompanying image. To further explore these differences, this video will look at one part of the story in both the film and the novelization of The Fellowship of the Ring. First, we'll watch a short clip from the film. Then, we'll read the matching chapter from the novelization. Since films move quickly and can show a lot in just a few minutes, while novels often take pages to describe the same events, we'll break the novelization chapters into short passages. After each passage, we'll stop to talk about what works well in the novel, what might be stronger in the film, and how each version tells the story in its own way. We'll go back and forth like this until we've worked through the whole chapter. At the end, we'll wrap everything up by thinking about what each medium does best, where they might struggle, and how comparing them helps us understand the story in a new way. By the time we're finished, we'll have a much clearer idea of how storytelling changes when it moves from screen to page, and why that matters. Let's begin. To the bridge of Khazad-dûm. What is this new devilry? A Balrog, a demon of the ancient world. This foe is beyond any of you. Run! Lead them on, Aragorn. The bridge is near. Do as I say. Swords are no more use
here. Gandalf! Merry Pippin! Sam! Nobody tosses a dwarf. Not the beard! Frodo! Stay there. Hold on! Hang on! Lean forward! Come on! Over the bridge! Fly! You cannot pass! I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of our North. The dark fire will not avail you. Flame of Ulduin! Go back to the shadow. You shall not pass! No, 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 no! Gandalf! Fly, you fools! Legolas, get them up. Give them a moment, for pity's sake. By nightfall, these hills will be swarming with orcs. We must reach the woods of Lothlorien. Come, Boromir. Legolas, Gimli, get them up. On your feet, Sam. Frodo? Frodo!
Next, we'll read the first passage from the chapter of the novelization, and then compare and analyze the differences. The vast chamber of Dwarodelf opened before them like a forest of stone, an endless sea of towering pillars stretching into shadow. Gandalf raised his staff, its light spilling across the polished black marble, illuminating colossal columns that climbed into the darkness overhead. The Fellowship followed in his wake, their footfalls echoing in the cavernous space.
This way!
Gandalf's voice rang out, urgent and strained as he beckoned them forward. The hobbits scurried after the wizard, their small frames dwarfed by the monumental architecture surrounding them. Frodo glanced back over his shoulder, his heart seizing in his chest. Movement flickered in the darkness behind them, sickly pale forms scuttling down the pillars with nightmarish agility. The creatures moved with unnatural speed, pouring from cracks in the ancient stonework like a pestilence. "What are those things?" Sam gasped behind him, his round face pale with terror. Frodo had no answer, transfixed by the horror unfolding around them as the creatures, goblins, swarmed into the chamber from every direction. They spilled from fissures in the ceiling, crawled along ribs of stone, and emerged from dark holes in the ground. Their movements were jerky and insectile, fingers and toes gripping the stone as they descended the massive columns. Aragorn and Gimli exchanged grim looks as the creatures closed in, their weapons already drawn. The dwarf gripped his axe with white knuckles, his eyes darting between the approaching hordes.
Like vermin in a forgotten pantry,
Gimli muttered, his voice a low growl.
They've been breeding in these halls for generations.
The companions slowed their pace as the full magnitude of their predicament became clear. Thousands of goblins surrounded them now, forming a tightening circle of malice. Their skin was pallid and mottled, stretched tight over bony frames. Sharp, irregular teeth gleamed in the dim light as they snarled and hissed, brandishing crude weapons with deadly intent. The Fellowship stood back to back, a small island in a sea of enemies. Legolas knocked an arrow to his bow, his keen elven eyes searching for targets among the mass. Boromir held his shield before him, sword at the ready. The hobbits huddled close to Gandalf, who held his staff aloft like a beacon. But then a curious thing happened. The chamber fell suddenly silent. The goblins ceased their advance, their attention drawn to something beyond the Fellowship. An unnatural orange glow began to illuminate the far end of the hall, casting long distorted shadows across the stone floor. A deep rumble shook the foundations of the chamber, causing dust and small fragments of stone to rain down from the darkness above. The goblins' demeanor changed instantly. They shrieked in terror, scrambling back into the darkness from which they had emerged, abandoning their prey without a second thought. Frodo felt a chill of dread deeper than anything he had experienced before. If these creatures, so eager for blood moments ago, were now fleeing in blind panic, what manner of horror approached? This opening passage from the novelization thrives on the elasticity of language to evoke vastness, menace, and atmosphere in a way that the film attempted to approximate visually. but arguably could not entirely replicate. The reader is guided not only through physical space, but also through layers of perception. Gandalf's light sweeping the marble, Frodo's tightening chest, the jerky insectile movements of the goblins. Each of these images is filtered through a particular consciousness. This multiplicity of perspectives allows the scene to unfold with a richness of inner texture, where we are not just seeing what's there, but feeling how the characters interpret and respond to it. The description can dwell on details that the film camera flashed past or left in shadow, and it can braid those sensory impressions with metaphor in ways that deliberately slow or quicken the reader's sense of time. Yet the prose is also bound by the inherent abstraction of written language. The chamber's, quote, forest of stone and sea of towering pillars, end quotes, are vivid phrases, but they depend on the reader's mental storehouse of imagery to conjure their scale and complexity. The film instantly delivered the visual enormity, the sheer dizzying heights of this space in a single wide shot, while the prose must approximate it through simile and accumulation of descriptive clauses. Similarly, the goblins, quote, jerky and insectile movements, end quote, while evocative in text, lacks the visceral jolt of actually seeing such motion in real time. Prose can suggest sound and movement, but it cannot impose them on the reader's senses with the same involuntary immediacy as in film. Let's continue. What fresh devilry awaits us now? Boromir whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant rumbling. The warrior's face, usually set with grim determination, now betrayed unmistakable fear. Gandalf did not answer immediately. The wizard stood motionless, his eyes closed in concentration, his weathered face tense with recognition. The fiery glow intensified, casting his features in harsh relief. When he finally opened his eyes, they were filled with a terrible knowledge. "A Balrog," he breathed, the words falling heavy as stones into the silence. "A demon of the ancient world." Frodo felt the blood drain from his face. Even in the Shire, tales were told of the fiery demons of the deep places, servants of the dark powers from before the shaping of the world, creatures of shadow and flame, against which no mortal weapon could prevail. Gandalf fixed them with a look of desperate urgency. "This foe lies beyond the strength of any of you," he warned, his voice tight with restraint. Then, suddenly urgent. "Make haste! We must not linger!" The fellowship broke into a run, Gandalf leading them toward a narrow archway at the far side of the hall. As they ran, Frodo could feel heat building at his back, like standing before an open forge. The air grew thick and sulphurous, burning his lungs with each desperate breath. Through the archway they fled, descending a steep staircase carved into the living rock. Boromir, at the front of the group, suddenly teetered at the brink of a sheer drop, where the stairs had crumbled away. His torch tumbled from his grasp, falling into the abyss below, a small point of light swallowed by endless darkness. Legolas lunged forward with elven swiftness, catching the man by his tunic and pulling him back from certain death. They stood at the edge, staring down into the boundless chasm that had nearly claimed Boromir's life. Far below, molten fire glowed like veins of liquid gold through cracks in the stone. Gandalf staggered to Aragorn's side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The exertion of their flight, combined with the sorcery he had worked to hide their presence, had taken its toll on the old wizard. "You must guide them forward," Gandalf urged, gripping Aragorn's shoulder. "The bridge lies ahead, our only path to safety." Aragorn hesitated, reluctant to assume leadership, while Gandalf still stood among them. "This foe is beyond your skill to fight," Gandalf insisted, reading the ranger's thoughts. "Steel will avail you nothing against what pursues us. Only swift feet may save us now." This passage leans heavily into one of prose's great advantages, the ability to stage not only the physical escape, but the emotional and mythic weight of the threat. The revelation of the Balrog is given breathing space. Boromir's whispered dread, Gandalf's pause before speaking, Frodo's recollection of old Shire tales. The film was able to reveal the Balrog visually in a single overwhelming shot, but the prose gets to delay that revelation, letting the horror bloom in the imagination first, nourished by the accumulated history and legend embedded in the characters' minds. We don't just see the threat, we inherit the fear it has sown over centuries. The descriptive range is another strength. We can move fluidly from the heat at Frodo's back to Boromir's torch tumbling into an abyss, to the glowing veins of liquid gold far below, without the camera having to find a way to capture each of these moments precisely. Prose can linger on symbolic textures, golden veins in rock, evoking something both precious and deadly, while also framing quick, perilous actions like Legolas's sudden grab without losing narrative coherence. The text also affords us private insights into Gandalf's physical strain and strategic thinking, something that the film could only attempt to convey through Ian McKellen's performance. That said, the weakness here is that some physical beats, Boromir's near fall, the scale of the chasm, the layout of the broken stair, require the reader to spatially imagine them, and that mental construction can lack the instant clarity of a cinematic shot. Let's continue. The Fellowship continued their desperate flight, descending winding stone staircases that switchbacked down the cavern wall. The path was treacherous, crumbling steps and narrow passages that dropped away into nothingness on either side. Their way forward led to a section of stairs broken by a gap several paces wide. Legolas measured the distance with experienced eyes and leapt across the void, landing gracefully on the other side. He turned back, beckoning to the others. "Gandalf!" he called, gesturing for the wizard to follow. The old man gathered himself and jumped, his grey robes billowing around him as he crossed the gap. Legolas steadied him as he landed, the wizard's face lined with fatigue. Suddenly, a whistling sound cut through the air, as arrows began to rain down around them. High above, goblin archers had taken position among the rocks, their crude arrows clattering against the stone steps. Legolas drew and loosed in one fluid motion, his arrow finding its mark in the forehead of a goblin archer. The creature toppled forward, plummeting into the darkness below. But for every goblin that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place, their arrows growing ever closer to their targets. Boromir gathered Merry and Pippin to him, one under each arm, and with a mighty leap cleared the gap in the stairs. But as his feet left the stone, the section he had been standing on crumbled away, widening the gap even further. Aragorn turned to Sam, whose round face was taut with fear as he eyed the growing chasm. "I'll have to toss you across," Aragorn told him gently. Before the hobbit could protest, Aragorn had lifted him and hurled him into Boromir's waiting arms. Gimli held up a hand as Aragorn turned to him.
"No one tosses a dwarf,"
he declared with stubborn pride. Gathering himself, the dwarf launched across the gap with a mighty effort, his boots barely catching the edge on the other side. He teetered backward, arms windmilling, until Legolas seized him by his beard.
"Not the beard!"
Gimli protested, even as the elf's grip saved him from certain death. No sooner had Gimli been pulled to safety than more of the ancient staircase gave way. Aragorn pushed Frodo further up the stairs as stones crumbled beneath their feet, leaving them stranded on a freestanding column of stone. The structure swayed precariously, disconnected from both sides.
"Hold tight!"
Aragorn murmured to Frodo, gripping the hobbit's shoulder.
"Lean forward when I tell you!"
The column began to tilt, the stone grinding beneath them as centuries-old mortar gave way. Frodo felt his stomach lurch as their perch shifted, leaning forward toward their companions.
"Now!"
Aragorn commanded, and they threw their weight forward. The column crashed into the intact stairway ahead of them, creating a momentary bridge. They leapt across just as the stone structure shattered, tumbling into the depths below in a cascade of broken masonry. This passage leans into the kind of moment-by-moment choreography that prose can either handle with great precision or risk bogging down in spatial description. The scene reads almost like a beat-for-beat action set-piece, each moment given its own mini-spotlight. The measured grace of Legolas's leap, the weary but determined arc of Gandalf's jump, Boromir's protective sweep of Merry and Pippin, the comic stubbornness of Gimli, and finally, the precarious balancing act on the free-standing column. This sequential attention allows the reader to experience the crossing as a tense, incremental ordeal, rather than a single sweeping visual. That's a strength unique to prose. It can slow the clock, expanding a few seconds of real time into a dense sequence of physical beats and character moments. The prose also has the advantage of narrative control over perspective. We can dip into Sam's fear, note Frodo's stomach lurch, register Aragorn's calm instructions, and still maintain an external view of collapsing stairs and widening gaps. The film had to choose which of these to emphasize visually, whereas prose can blend them into one fluid mental panorama without losing continuity. The main weakness, however, is that spatial clarity depends entirely on the reader's mental mapping skills. The text must do the heavy lifting of orienting the reader. In the film, a few shots were able to convey every spatial relationship instantly, letting the audience feel the danger of the environment without pausing the momentum for explanation. But in prose, there's always a balancing act between keeping the geometry comprehensible and maintaining pace. Let's continue. From the darkness below came a roar that shook dust from the cavern ceiling, a sound of primal rage and malevolence that froze the blood in Frodo's veins. A massive shadow moved through the flames far below, unfurling vast wings of smoke and darkness.
The bridge is just ahead!
Gandalf urged them forward, his voice tight with urgency.
Make haste!
They fled down the remaining stairs and into another vast hall. Here the floor was split with fissures that belched flame and noxious fumes. Across the chamber, Frodo could see a slender arch of stone spanning a bottomless chasm, a bridge, barely wide enough for one person to cross at a time.
Over the bridge!
Gandalf commanded.
Flee, all of you!
The Fellowship sprinted for the narrow crossing. Behind them, flames erupted from the pit they had just left, climbing higher than the tallest towers of Hobbiton. Through this curtain of fire stepped a creature from a nightmare. The Balrog stood taller than the greatest trees of the old forest, its body wreathed in shadow and flame. Massive horns curled from its head, and wings of smoke unfurled from its shoulders. Its eyes were pits of malevolent fire, and when it opened its maw, Frodo could see infernal light pouring from deep within its throat. One by one, the companions raced across the bridge, its narrow span offering no rail or handhold to prevent a fatal fall. Frodo glanced down as he crossed, seeing nothing but endless darkness below. Once across, he turned back to see Gandalf standing alone at the center of the bridge. The wizard appeared impossibly small before the towering demon, yet he stood his ground, staff raised defiantly.
You cannot pass!
Gandalf's voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by power Frodo had never heard from him before. Gandalf! Frodo cried out in alarm, moving to go back, but Boromir's strong arm held him in place. The Balrog advanced onto the bridge, drawing itself up to its full, terrifying height. Its wings spread from wall to wall, blotting out the light behind it. In its hand materialized a sword of living flame, casting a hellish light across the ancient stonework.
I stand as servant of the secret fire,
Gandalf intoned, his voice resonating with ancient power.
I wield the flame of Arnor. Dark fire shall not avail you here. Flame of Udun!
The Balrog brought its blade of fire down upon Gandalf with overwhelming force. A blinding flash erupted as the demon's weapon struck an invisible barrier surrounding the wizard. A globe of brilliant white light emanating from Gandalf's staff. The fiery sword shattered into a cascade of molten fragments.
Return to the shadows from whence you came,
Gandalf commanded. In response, the Balrog stepped fully onto the bridge, brandishing a whip of many flaming thongs. The ancient stone groaned beneath the demon's weight. Gathering his strength, Gandalf raised his staff high and brought it down upon the bridge with a resounding crack.
You shall not pass,
he thundered, his voice echoing throughout the vast cavern. For a moment, nothing happened. The Balrog snorted contemptuously and advanced another step. Then, with a sound like the breaking of the world, the bridge shattered beneath the demon's feet. Stone crumbled away, and the Balrog plunged into the abyss, its roar of rage fading as it fell. Exhausted by his efforts, Gandalf turned away from the edge, his shoulders slumped in fatigue. Relief washed over Frodo's face as he watched the wizard making his way toward them. Then, in a moment that would haunt Frodo's dreams forever after, a tendril of flame lashed up from the darkness. The Balrog's whip wrapped around Gandalf's ankle, yanking him over the edge. The wizard's staff and sword fell away as he clung to the broken bridge by his fingertips. For one terrible moment, Gandalf's eyes met Frodo's across the gulf between them. In that gaze, Frodo saw many things: wisdom and sorrow, regret and resolve. But mostly, he saw a farewell.
Go now,
Gandalf urged them, his voice suddenly calm amidst the chaos.
This burden is not yours to bear.
Then he let go, plummeting after the Balrog into the unfathomed darkness below.
No!
Frodo's anguished cry echoed through the chamber as he struggled against Boromir's restraining grip.
Gandalf!
But the wizard was gone. This passage plays to one of prose's strongest abilities, shaping mythic confrontation through deliberate layering of scale and emotion. The Balrog's arrival is not merely visual, it is announced in sound, felt in Frodo's body, imagined through comparisons to the tallest trees, and finally revealed in detail that blends the physical with the infernal. The film delivered an instantly overwhelming image of the Balrog, but prose can unfold its arrival like a ritual, each sentence deepening the sense of inevitability before the first blow is struck. The pacing is another strength. It alternates between bursts of immediate action, such as the companions racing the narrow bridge, with the exchanges between Gandalf and the Balrog, where the words themselves take on a weight of prophecy. This allows the moment to swell in the imagination beyond what the film edit could sustain. The interior perspective, especially Frodo's, amplifies the emotional dimension. His horror, the restraint of Boromir's arm, the layered meaning in Gandalf's final glance. These details grant the fall its lingering sting, not just as a loss, but as an intimate farewell embedded in the chaos. That said, the written form here also shows its limitations. The scale of the hall, the bridge's terrifying narrowness, and the sheer enormity of the Balrog must be conjured entirely in the reader's imagination. In the film, a single wide-angle shot collapsed this uncertainty into a shared, unambiguous sense of scale. Similarly, While the prose can describe the flash of impact and the shattering bridge, it cannot make the reader physically jump in the seat the way the sound design, lighting, and visual shock cuts did in the film. Let's continue. Boromir lifted Frodo and carried him toward the exit as goblin arrows began to rain down once more from hidden arches. Aragorn stood frozen for a moment, staring at the place where Gandalf had fallen, before ducking away from the whistling arrows and following the others out of the mines. They emerged through a great stone archway into the blinding daylight of a rocky mountainside. After the darkness of Moria, the sunlight was almost painful, yet it brought no warmth to their hearts. One by one, they collapsed upon the stones. Sam sat heavily upon a boulder, his face buried in his hands, as silent sobs racked his sturdy frame. Merry cradled Pippin, who lay weeping inconsolably. Gimli strained against Boromir's restraining embrace, his face contorted with grief and rage. Legolas stood apart, disbelief etched upon his fair features as he stared at the distant horizon, trying to comprehend loss in a way his immortal nature had never prepared him for. Aragorn alone remained composed, methodically cleaning his blade as he surveyed their surroundings with the practiced eye of a ranger. Yet even his stoic demeanor could not entirely mask the shadow of grief that had fallen upon him. "We cannot linger here," he announced, sheathing his sword. "By nightfall, these hills will be swarming with orcs." Boromir looked up, his face flushed with emotion. "Grant them a moment's peace," he pleaded. "For mercy's sake." "We haven't the luxury of time for mourning," Aragorn replied, his voice firm yet not unkind. "The woods of Lothlorien lie ahead. We must reach their shelter before darkness falls." He moved among the group, helping Sam to his feet with gentle insistence. "Come now, on your feet." As the others slowly gathered themselves, Aragorn noticed a solitary figure walking away from the group. "Frodo!" he called. The hobbit did not respond immediately. When he finally turned, Aragorn was struck by the profound transformation in the halfling's face. Grief had carved deep lines where none had been before. Tears traced clean paths through the grime and soot on his cheeks, but it was his eyes that had changed the most. The innocent wonder that had characterized the young hobbit, now replaced by something harder, older. In that moment, Aragorn understood that Frodo had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. The burden of the ring had always been heavy, but now it was compounded by the weight of personal loss. The path ahead would be darker still, but Aragorn now knew it was his duty to ensure that Frodo would not have to walk it alone. This final passage after Gandalf's fall shows prose at its most introspective, able to let the aftermath breathe in ways the film had to abbreviate for pacing. The scene unfolds not as a quick regrouping before the next leg of the journey, but as a tableau of grief. Each member of the Fellowship rendered through their distinct posture and coping mechanisms. Sam's buried face, Merry's protective cradling of Pippin, Gimli's restrained fury, Legolas's distant disbelief, Aragorn's controlled efficiency masking pain. In prose, these can coexist in a single sustained paragraph without cutting between shots or relying on the actor's silent performances. The reader can take in the group's emotional spectrum simultaneously, holding all of it in mind. That gives the moment a density of collective mourning that may have been harder to convey in the film. The transition to Frodo's private transformation is one of the text's most effective uses of the written medium. Rather than relying solely on visible signs, a bowed head, a tightened jaw, it explicitly articulates the internal change Aragorn perceives. The loss of innocence, the hardening of the gaze, the layering of grief atop the ring's burden. The film could only suggest this, but the certainty of Aragorn's recognition and the articulation of its meaning comes across more clearly in language. This kind of narrated insight lets the audience know exactly what emotional threshold has been crossed, rather than leaving it as subtext that might have been lost in the film. However, this strength is also a potential weakness. Because the prose spells out emotional states, it risks leaning into explicit telling rather than trusting the reader to intuit meaning from gestures and dialogue. In the film, less was said, and the audience were left to assemble the emotional truth themselves from the interplay of performance, editing, and pacing. But here, the narration guides the reader's interpretation, which preserves clarity, but can flatten ambiguity. In summary, this chapter of the novelization gains a poignancy the film camera cannot fully command. The ability to unify the Fellowship's grief with a foreshadowing of the journey's emotional toll, and to anchor it in Aragorn's renewed commitment. The physical sunlight outside Moria does not erase the shadow that has settled on them, and prose allows that shadow to be described not just as atmosphere, but as a shared and individual burden that will shape everything to come. Thank you for watching this comparative analysis. Next time, we'll be comparing the scene where the Fellowship arrives at Lothlorien with the corresponding chapter in the novelization and analyzing the differences. Take care, and if you're listening to this, please send help.